Knowing that we were talking about investments today, I get a lot of calls from agents and real estate clients alike about how tenants impact investment. The basics for investors to understand is that the purchase and sales agreement is going to govern how the existing tenants, if any, are going to convey with the transaction. So one critical consideration to determine is whether or not there's a lease. In the event that you have a lease on the property, then those tenants are automatically going to convey with the purchase and sales agreement. The buyer is absolutely required to honor all of those rental terms, the rental amount, until the expiration of the lease. So if you have a listing and you have a client who's currently renting the property with a lease agreement, it's critical to have a conversation with any prospective buyers about, are they planning to use it as a single family home? And if the answer is yes, then there needs to be a conversation whether or not that lease can be broken with the current tenant by the landlord or the current owner. In most cases, or in many cases, there are no lease agreements. Rhode Island tends to be a state where lease agreements are not renewed. There's a 1-year lease or a 6-month lease, and then after that it becomes month to month. So that's pretty common. And in that case, the buyer really it's more of a dealer's choice decision as to whether or not they want to take the property with the tenants or not. So it's up to the buyer whether or not they want to have the property free and clear of tenants, or if they want for the property to be conveyed with the current tenants but with no lease agreement. And that certainly does give the option of the buyer to kind of change up the lease terms once they've taken ownership.
What happens at the closing if there are tenants?
It's a great question, Emilio, and certainly the multifamily purchase and sales agreement does contemplate that. Security deposits need to be transferred. That is an absolute requirement because it becomes the buyer's responsibility to convey that security deposit back to the tenant when they subsequently vacate.
Okay.
Additionally, there would need to be prorations for rent. And this comes up a lot. We have to assume that the rent is current because that's what the sales agreements contemplate. So if today is June 9th, and we're having a closing, which would never happen because it's a Sunday. But if we were going to have a closing on June 9th and the tenants haven't paid for the month of June yet, although the rent is due June 1st, they usually pay on the 10th, the seller's saying, I'm just going to let the buyer take care of it. Well, that's not the way the sales agreement reads. We are going to expect that the seller is going to give a monetary credit to the buyer from June 10th all the way through June 30th or however number of days left. So at that point, the seller's sort of out of luck that they didn't collect the first 10 days of the rent. So it's really important that sellers understand that and are collecting the rent in advance as part of the closing because it's their expectation that they are going to make those adjustments. 3 pieces of advice I would recommend for investors or buyers who are looking to make an investment. Highly recommend having all the security deposits and rental adjustments handled properly at closing to avoid any situations. There are some things where we can actually get the tenants involved if we feel as though we need to do that. Rhode Island, as we mostly know, is a tenant-friendly state. So I always recommend that it's a lot harder to get them out than it is to get them in. So make sure you're screening your tenants well. And to that end, having a property manager involved who can actually help place the tenants, collect the money, handle the problems is really, I think, a very worthwhile use of funds.